Okay, let's tackle chapter problem 1. Two soap producers, the Fortnum Company and the Mason Company, can stress either newspapers or magazines in their following advertising campaigns. The payoff matrix is as follows. So you're given with simultaneous game, right, where two players take action at the same time. So the number in the left will be the payoff for the player in the row, Fortnum, and number in the right in each cell is a payoff for column player, who is Mason Company. Question A. Is there a dominant strategy for each firm? If so, what is it? Question B. What will be the profit of each firm? Question C. Is this game an example of the prisoner's dilemma? Let me copy this game into a whiteboard. Let me see you there. Okay, so I copy the matrix, right? So let's look at the root player first, Fortnum. So if root player decide to play newspaper, stress newspaper, his payoff is either 8 if column player match it by newspaper, or you'll be receiving 7 if column player opponent play magazine, right? So either 8 or 7 depending on opponent's strategy. But then if Fortnum decide to do other strategy, stressing magazine, you'll receive 9 if opponent does newspaper, or receiving 8 if opponent does magazine, right? So either newspaper generate 8 or 7, magazine generate 9 and 8, right? So here you will be comparing magazine generate 9, newspaper generate 8. If opponent does M, newspaper, so there is inequality opening to bottom, right? But then if opponent does different strategy, again, magazine generate 8, which is greater than newspaper's payoff. So what you find here is Mason opponents from the perspective of Fortnum, whether opponents Mason does newspaper or magazine, Fortnum newspaper's strategy generate less payoff than magazine, right? So basically you are comparing this payoff factor for a role player from playing magazine to the payoff factor of 8 and 7 element wise for newspaper. Then you can conclude for Fortnum there's a dominant strategy which is playing magazine, stress magazine, as it generate 9 and 8, which is greater payoff than 8 and 7, no matter what opponent does. So there's a dominant strategy. So we can answer question A. For Fortnum, there's a dominant strategy which is playing stress magazines, right? Then what about the case for Mason? For Mason, now you can see if Mason decide to do magazine, newspaper, it can generate 9, right? Or it can generate 8 depending on opponent's choice, right? But then if we decide to do different strategy, stressing magazine, it can generate 8 or 7. So for opponent's newspaper, Mason's strategy, newspaper generate greater payoff than magazine, so there is inequality opening up to the left. But if opponent does different strategy, magazine, again, Mason's newspaper generate greater payoff than magazine, right? So no matter what the opponent does, again, this factor generate greater payoff element-wise, right? Here element means when opponent does different strategy. So 9 and 8 is greater than 8 and 7. And this newspaper strategy for Mason generate greatest payoff no matter what opponent does. So again, there is dominant strategy for Mason. The conclusion is for company Mason, there is dominant strategy which is doing stress magazines, newspapers, right? So that's the question A. Question B, what is the profit of each firm, which is same as payoff here? So when each company noticed that it has dominant strategy, which is generating greatest payoff, they will play the dominant strategy because it generates greatest payoff no matter what the opponent does. So here we know for Fortnum, doing magazine is dominant strategy, generating greatest payoff. For Mason, we also know doing newspaper is a dominant strategy, so each will play that. Then you can see that the realized payoff is 9 for Fortnum and 8 for Mason. So question B answer is, question B, Fortnum will receive 9 million, right? And Mason will receive 8 million. That's the profit or payoff for each firm. Question C, is this game an example of prisoner's dilemma? So again, prisoner's dilemma is that dominant strategy equilibrium actually generate worse outcome for the society, right? In each individual. But if you look at here, each company generate 9 and 8, and the total payoff for these two people society is 17. When you add up is 17, and compared to other possible outcome, this is 17, this will be 15, and this will be 15. So total profit 17 for two company is now worse than other possible situation that can happen. So this is not an example of prisoner's dilemma. Thanks for watching.